I was never the type to scare easy. Small-town life had hardened me against the usual fears. Creaking floors, flickering streetlights, the feeling of being watched. But that night, something felt wrong. I locked up Maplewood books, tucking the key into my pocket. The old wooden sign above the door swayed in the breeze, the faint squeak blending into the silence of Black Hollow. The streets were empty, too empty. Even the usual stray dogs that rummaged through the alley were nowhere to be seen. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, telling myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a quiet night, nothing unusual. Then I heard it. A howl, long, deep, and too close. Every muscle in my body went rigid. It wasn't a coyote. I'd heard those all my life. This was different, richer, layered with something that made my skin prickle. I turned, scanning the tree line across the road. Blackwood Forest. The trees stood tall and unmoving, but something was there, watching. A low murmur of laughter pulled my focus. Across the street, a group of men stood outside Miller's Tavern, their voices light, careless. Normal. They hadn't heard it. Maybe I was imagining things. I exhaled and started walking, forcing my steps to stay even. Home wasn't far, just a few blocks, past the bakery and the old church. I could make it, but with every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Something was following me. I whipped around. Nothing, just the empty street and the glow of a single street lamp buzzing overhead. "Relax, Lena," I muttered under my breath, rolling my shoulders. "It's just your imagination." Except my imagination never made the wind feel like it was breathing against the back of my neck. I picked up my pace, crossing the road toward home. I could already see the porch light of my tiny rental, the warm glow promising safety. Then the second howl came, closer. I froze, my pulse slammed against my ribs. Leaves rustled in the trees to my right. A shadow moved, big, fast, too fast. My breath caught, the sound lodging in my throat. I wasn't imagining this. I took a slow step back, my sneakers scuffing against the pavement. Then he stepped out. Tall, broad shoulders wrapped in a black jacket. Dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his fingers through it. And eyes, golden, burning under the street lamp's glow. A stranger, but not just any stranger. He looked like he belonged in a world where men didn't just walk into the night. They owned it.
"Lost?"
His voice was low, edged with something that wasn't quite amusement. I swallowed hard. "No." One corner of his mouth twitched.
"Then why do you look like you've just seen a ghost?"
I straightened my spine, masking the unease curling in my gut. "I don't." He studied me, his gaze sharp, assessing. Then he exhaled through his nose like he knew something I didn't.
"Go home, Lena."
I flinched. "How do you know my name?" His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable.
"You should get inside."
He glanced toward the trees, his jaw tightening.
"It's not safe out here."
My fingers twitched at my sides. "And you are?" For a moment he didn't answer. Then he took a slow step forward, the glow from the street lamp casting sharp angles over his face.
"Ronan.
He said.
Ronan Blackwood."
My stomach dropped. Blackwood. The name of the very forest behind him, the same name whispered in town gossip. The family that kept to themselves that no one really knew much about. And the way he was looking at me now, like he knew exactly what I was feeling, like he could hear the wild, unsteady rhythm in my chest.
"Go inside, Lena."
His voice dropped, quieter this time.
"Before it's too late."
The third howl shattered the night. This time it wasn't alone. Sleep didn't come easy. I spent most of the night tossing and turning, my mind circling the same thoughts like a dog chasing its tail. Ronan Blackwood. The name had weight, like it belonged to someone who could turn the world upside down with a single word. And those eyes? Golden, sharp, watching me like I was something worth watching. I groaned, shoving my blanket off. It was useless. I wasn't going to sleep, not with the memory of that howl echoing in my head. By the time my alarm blared, I was already awake. I got dressed in my usual jeans, a worn-in sweater, boots that had seen better days. Maplewood Books wasn't exactly high fashion. The tiny shop barely had customers most days, but it was mine, my little escape. I grabbed my keys and slung my bag over my shoulder, pushing last night's weirdness aside. Whatever happened, whoever he was, I wasn't about to let it mess with my day. But of course, life had other plans. The second I stepped into the shop, I stopped short. He was there. Ronan, leaning against the counter like he belonged there, one hand lazily draped over the edge, the other spinning a small metal coin between his fingers. His jacket was unzipped today, revealing a plain black t-shirt that did nothing to hide the way his shoulders filled out the fabric. His eyes lifted the moment I walked in, locking onto mine like he'd been waiting.
Morning, Lena.
My fingers curled around the strap of my bag. How did you... I shut my mouth. Number, I wasn't about to play the confused girl in a horror movie. I straightened my back. What are you doing here? He smirked, slow and easy, like he found something amusing about me being on edge.
I wanted to see if you listened.
He flicked the coin into the air and caught it.
Guess not.
I walked past him and set my bag on the counter. You wanted to see if I listened? What does that even mean? He tilted his head.
I told you to stay inside.
My lips parted, but nothing came out. Because what? Who did he think he was, telling me what to do? I crossed my arms. I don't take orders from strangers. He exhaled through his nose, amused.
Fair enough.
I waited for him to say something else, but he just stood there, like he had all the time in the world. Are you here to buy a book? I asked, dragging a hand through my hair. His gaze followed the motion.
Do I look like a guy who reads a lot?
I glanced at his broad frame, the slight roughness in his voice, the way his entire presence felt like something wild barely contained. No, I admitted, you look like a guy who causes trouble. That smirk returned, slower this time.
And yet, you're still talking to me.
I hated that he had a point. I huffed, moving behind the counter. Look, if you're not here to buy anything, I have work to do. He didn't budge.
You're not even curious.
I stilled. About what? His gaze didn't waver.
The howls.
A cold weight settled in my stomach. I forced out a laugh. What, you think the town has a werewolf problem? His expression didn't change. The silence stretched. A flicker of doubt crawled up my spine. I suddenly felt too exposed, like the room had shrunk. The shop was small, but I'd never felt trapped before. I grabbed the nearest book and flipped it open, pretending to read. If you're trying to scare me, it's not working. Ronan didn't move, didn't speak. Then finally, he leaned in just enough to make my pulse pick up. Not in fear, but something dangerously close to intrigue.
I'm not trying to scare you, Lena.
His voice was lower now, quieter.
I'm trying to keep you alive.
Something about the way he said it sent heat creeping up my neck. I clenched the book in my hands. You're being dramatic. He studied me for a long moment before sighing.
Maybe.
He pushed off the counter and turned toward the door.
But you should be careful.
I swallowed. Of what? He glanced at me over his shoulder, those golden eyes flashing with something I couldn't read.
You'll find out soon enough.
And then just like that, he was gone. I should have gone straight home. After Ronan left the shop, I stood there for a good 5 minutes, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at the door like he might come back. But he didn't, and the weight of his words lingered, thick as fog in my mind.
I'm trying to keep you alive.
What the hell did that even mean? It was probably nothing, just some cryptic way to mess with me. He had the kind of face that could get away with saying things like that. Sharp angles, unreadable eyes, the kind of smirk that left people wondering if they should run or lean in closer. I wasn't leaning. I shook my head, pushing off the counter. The sun had already dipped past the rooftops when I locked up the shop. Normally I'd take the main road home past Miller's Tavern and the bakery. But something about the way Ronan had looked at me made my skin itch. I needed air. So like an idiot, I took the long way, the road that cut past the woods. It wasn't the smartest choice considering what had happened last night, but the sky was clear, the moon huge and bright, spilling silver across the treetops. And despite the way my body felt off, like I was balancing on the edge of something I didn't understand, I convinced myself I was fine, until I heard it. Not a howl this time, something closer. I slowed, glancing over my shoulder. The street behind me was empty, not a single car, not a single person. The hairs on my arms rose. It was nothing, just my imagination. Still I walked faster. The sound came again, a crunch of leaves, a snap of a branch. I sucked in a sharp breath. Whipping around, nothing. The trees stood tall and silent, their shadows stretching long across the road. I exhaled, shaking my head. Get a grip, Lena. Then the wind shifted, and something huge came tearing out of the woods. I barely had time to react. 1 second I was alone. The next, a massive shape lunged straight at me. I hit the ground hard, my shoulder slamming against the pavement. The thing was on top of me before I could even scream. A wolf. But not just any wolf. This one was wrong. Twice the size of any normal animal, its fur was dark, matted, streaked, with something that smelled like rust and dirt. Its breath came hot and ragged against my skin, teeth glinting under the moonlight. My body locked up. I should have screamed, I should have fought, but I couldn't move. Something about this moment, the way the wolf hovered over me, the way my body reacted like it had been waiting for this exact second, sent my mind spinning, and then just when I thought it was over, a blur of black crashed into the wolf, ripping it off me with a force that rattled my bones. I scrambled back, sucking in a shaky breath. Another wolf. This one was bigger, stronger, sleek black fur, golden eyes that burned like fire. Ronan, I guess. My brain barely had time to catch up before they collided again, a brutal tangle of claws and teeth. The first wolf let out a strangled sound, thrashing as Ronan sank his teeth into its shoulder. I could only stare. The world tilted, reality twisting in ways it wasn't supposed to. Ronan wasn't just some stranger with sharp words and golden eyes. He wasn't even human. The two wolves rolled, limbs crashing against the pavement. The first one yelped, scrambling back toward the trees. It hesitated, eyes locking onto mine. A cold wave rushed through me. It knew me. Then it turned and vanished into the woods. Silence. The only sound left was my own breath, ragged and unsteady. Ronan stood at the edge of the road, his massive frame still in wolf form, staring after it. Then, just as smoothly as he'd shifted into it, he stepped forward. And before my eyes, he changed. Bones cracked, his body stretched, fur retracting like it had never been there. In seconds, he was standing in front of me again. Human. His shirt was shredded, his bare chest rising and falling, his arms tense like he was still running on instinct. The sharp cut of his jaw was tighter than before. eyes flickering between human and something else. I stared, my breath caught in my throat. His body was built like a sculpture, strong, cut, all lean muscle and tension, but it wasn't just that. It was the energy coming off him, power, danger, something ancient.
You okay?
His voice was rougher than before. I blinked, my mind still lagging behind. You just... I swallowed. What are you? Ronan exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair.
I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this tonight.
I swallowed hard, my legs still wobbly beneath me. Do what? Huh? He glanced toward the woods, his jaw tightening.
Explain.
I let out a sharp laugh. Yeah, that'd be nice. For a second, he just looked at me, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he sighed.
There are things in this town you don't understand, Lena. Things you're not supposed to understand.
I bristled. That's not an answer. He took a slow step toward me.
I know.
His gaze dragged over me, checking for injuries. I wasn't sure why, but the way his eyes lingered made my skin feel too warm, too aware of just how close he was. He was barefoot, his jeans ripped from the fight. His chest was marked with faint scratches. A streak of dirt along his collarbone. He looked like he belonged in a fight, like he had always belonged in a fight. I swallowed again. That thing, the first one, what was it? Ronan's expression darkened.
A rogue.
I frowned. A rogue?
Not like me.
His voice dropped lower.
Not like us.
My pulse kicked up. Us? Something flickered in his gaze.
You need to go home.
Not until you tell me what's going on. Ronan exhaled sharply. He looked up at the sky for a long moment, like he was having a silent argument with himself. Then he rolled his shoulders and turned back to me.
You're changing, Lena.
A weight settled in my stomach. What? His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight.
That wolf knew you. It came after you for a reason.
I shook my head, a strange heat crawling up my spine. That's ridiculous. But deep down, I wasn't sure it was. Ronan held my gaze, something unspoken passing between us. Finally, he stepped back.
Go home, Lena.
His voice was softer now.
Get some rest. We'll talk soon.
I hesitated, watching him. And if I don't want to wait? Something in his eyes flickered, like I'd surprised him. Then, before I could blink, he was gone. Just a shadow slipping back into the night. Sleep didn't find me that night. I kept replaying everything. Ronan shifting, the rogue wolf attacking, the way my body had felt different. Like something inside me had recognized all of it. That was the part that scared me the most. I wasn't supposed to understand what happened. I was supposed to be in shock, freaking out, maybe even convincing myself I had imagined it. But I wasn't. I knew it had been real. Too real. The early morning light barely touched the sky when I gave up on sleep and shoved myself out of bed. My skin felt strange, like it didn't quite fit right, and the restlessness in my bones wouldn't settle. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to find them. Ronan. I didn't know where he lived, but I had a feeling he wouldn't be hard to track down. Guys like him didn't just blend into the background. By the time I left the house, the town was still waking up. A few cars rolled by, but the streets were mostly quiet. The cool air helped clear my mind, but that off feeling hadn't gone away. It was in the way my senses stretched too far. How I could hear footsteps a block away. How I picked up conversations that should have been out of range. Something was changing, and I wasn't sure I was ready to know what. Finding Ronan wasn't the hard part. Approaching him was. He was standing outside Miller's Tavern, leaning against the side of the building with his arms crossed, watching the street like he was expecting trouble. Or maybe expecting me. He didn't look surprised when he saw me. If anything, there was something knowing in his expression, like he had been waiting.
Couldn't stay away, huh?
His voice was rough from lack of sleep. I stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure of what to say. Up close, he looked different in the daylight, less like a myth, more like a man. His dark hair was a little messier than usual, his jawline shadowed with stubble. His black t-shirt stretched across broad shoulders that seemed permanently tense. But his eyes, they still burned gold. I swallowed. You owe me answers. He exhaled, shaking his head.
You should be resting.
I should be understanding what the hell is happening to me. I stepped closer, feeling something buzz beneath my skin. I'm changing, aren't I? Ronan studied me for a long second. Then, finally, he pushed off the wall.
Walk with me.
I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because some part of me already knew that once I started down this path, there was no turning back. Still, I followed. We didn't talk right away. The town faded behind us as we took a side road that led toward the woods. My pulse picked up the moment we reached the tree line, but Ronan didn't slow down. I swallowed. Where are we going?
You'll see.
That wasn't comforting, but I didn't stop. The deeper we went, the more I felt it, that pull in my chest, like something here knew me. The trees swayed gently overhead, the wind carrying sounds I shouldn't have been able to hear. A bird landing on a branch, a rabbit darting through the underbrush. Everything felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Ronan glanced at me.
You feel it, don't you?
I didn't answer. He exhaled.
That's the beast waking up.
I stiffened. Beast? He stopped walking. When he turned to face me, something in his expression had shifted. Less teasing, more serious.
Lena, what do you think last night was about?
I swallowed. A rogue wolf attacked me. You stopped it. His jaw tightened.
It wasn't just any rogue. It was after you.
I frowned. Why? Ronan hesitated, then finally he said,
Because you're not human.
A rush of heat ran through me. That's ridiculous.
Is it?
His gaze dragged over me, unreadable.
Think about it. Have you ever felt different? Like something inside you didn't quite belong?
I opened my mouth, then shut it. Because I had. Not all the time, not in a way I could explain, but in moments, flashes, like the way I never felt sick, no matter how many people around me caught colds, or the way I could always tell when someone was watching me, even in a crowded room, or the way last night had felt right, even when it should have terrified me. Ronan stepped closer. His voice softened, but his eyes burned.
You feel it now, don't you?
I exhaled shakily. This is insane. He studied me for a second. Then, so quickly I barely saw it coming, he moved. 1 second, he was standing in front of me. The next, he was behind me, his breath close to my ear. But before I could react, I moved too, not consciously, not with thought. My body just reacted. I spun fast, too fast, grabbing his wrist before he could touch my shoulder. My muscles tightened, instincts flaring up like they had always been there, just waiting to be used. I shouldn't have been able to move like that, but I had. My chest rose and fell as I stared at him, my own grip tight around his arm. Ronan smirked.
See?
I let go, stepping back like I had been burned. What the hell is happening to me? His expression turned serious.
You're awakening, Lena.
I shook my head. Number that. That doesn't make sense. Ronan tilted his head.
When's your birthday?
I blinked. What?
Your birthday.
He repeated. I hesitated. It's in 2 days. His eyes darkened.
That explains it.
Explains what? Ronan exhaled.
Shifters don't just exist. We become.
He studied me carefully.
Our abilities start waking up around our 25th birthday.
I stared at him. That's ridiculous, I whispered. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. Ronan watched me carefully, his expression unreadable.
You're not just anyone, Lena. There's something different about you. Something the rogues can sense.
I swallowed. So what now? Ronan's gaze flickered toward the sky.
Now, we train.
My stomach tightened, not in fear but in anticipation, because no matter how crazy this was, some part of me had been waiting for this moment my whole life. Ronan led me deeper into the woods, his pace unhurried but purposeful. I could tell he was thinking, his jaw clenched slightly, his hands flexing every few steps, like he was fighting the urge to punch something. I wasn't exactly calm either. Everything in me buzzed with restless energy, like I was standing on the edge of something huge, like the ground beneath my feet wasn't as solid as I thought. Finally, I broke the silence. You're worried? Ronan let out a breath, his golden eyes flicking toward me.
You could say that.
That's not really an answer. He stopped walking, turning to face me.
It's not just about you, Lena. Things in the pack are complicated.
I folded my arms. Complicated? How? Ronan hesitated. He glanced up toward the treetops, as if checking for unseen eyes, then shook his head.
Come on, it's better if I show you.
I followed him without another word, my pulse picking up as we moved through the trees. The deeper we went, the stronger the sense of knowing became, like I had walked this path before, even though I knew I hadn't. We emerged into a clearing and I sucked in a quiet breath. Wolves, not just one or two, at least a dozen of them, all standing in clusters, their expressions ranging from wary to outright hostile. Some were in human form, their sharp eyes locked onto me. Others lingered at the edge of the trees, their wolf forms tense. It felt like stepping into a room right after an argument, except whatever was brewing here wasn't just words. It was something deeper, darker. A man stepped forward, broad-shouldered and graying at the temples. His presence alone carried weight, like he was used to being listened to. His gaze settled on Ronan first.
You brought her here?
His voice was even, but there was a thread of steel beneath it. Ronan didn't flinch.
She deserves to know the truth.
The man's sharp blue eyes flicked to me, assessing, judging.
She's not pack.
She will be.
Ronan said. Something in the air shifted. A few wolves exchanged glances. A woman with auburn hair scoffed. That's not your call to make. Ronan's jaw tightened.
It's hers.
The woman's eyes slid over me like I was some puzzle she hadn't quite figured out. And what does she think? I exhaled. I think I don't like people talking about me like I'm not here. That earned a few murmurs. The older man, who I was quickly realizing was someone important, studied me for another long moment before speaking again.
You don't know what you're stepping into, girl.
Then explain it to me. He exchanged a look with Ronan. Ronan nodded slightly, and the man sighed before turning back to me.
This pack has been divided for years, ever since Ronan's father died.
My stomach clenched. I glanced at Ronan, but his face was unreadable. The man continued.
There are those who believe Ronan should lead, and those who believe his uncle should.
I frowned. His uncle? A man I hadn't noticed before stepped forward. He had the same sharp features as Ronan, but where Ronan's presence was intense, this man's was calculated, cold. His smile didn't reach his eyes.
That would be me.
A strange unease settled in my chest. Everything about this man felt off. He looked polished, put together, but there was something in his gaze that made my instincts scream danger. I didn't like it. He studied me like I was a piece on a chessboard.
So this is the girl causing all the trouble.
Ronan moved closer, his body shifting just slightly in front of mine.
She's none of your concern, Dorian.
Dorian smirked.
Oh, but she is. She's changing, isn't she? Awakening.
He tilted his head.
Which means she'll have to choose a side.
I stiffened. A side? Dorian's smile widened.
There's a war coming, darling, and you're standing in the middle of it.
The clearing felt even smaller. I looked at Ronan. His shoulders were tight, his fingers curling slightly at his sides, but his face was calm, controlled. Still I could feel it, the storm brewing beneath. I turned back to Dorian. And what exactly are you fighting over? Dorian's gaze darkened.
Power.
It wasn't an answer, not really, but I could tell that's all I was going to get. Ronan exhaled sharply.
We're done here.
Dorian chuckled.
Of course. Run along then.
But just as we turned to leave, he added,
Component placement. Just remember, Lena, when the time comes, you'll have to make a choice, and I'd hate to see you make the wrong one.
I didn't answer, because deep down I already knew this was only the beginning. I could still feel the weight of Dorian's words pressing on me as Ronan and I walked away from the clearing. The pack was divided, a war was coming, and somehow I was at the center of it. I wasn't pack. Not yet, but I was changing, and every time I was near Ronan, something inside me pulled, like a string being tugged, tightening, demanding my attention. We walked in silence for a while. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. Ronan was tense, his shoulders were stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. You okay? His jaw worked for a moment before he spoke.
Dorian is dangerous.
Yeah, I got that. Ronan slowed, glancing at me.
You don't understand, Lena. He won't stop until he has full control of the pack. He thinks he's entitled to it.
And you don't? His expression darkened.
I don't want power for the sake of power.
I studied him. Then what do you want? His steps faltered for half a second, just enough for me to notice. He didn't answer. We reached the riverbank, the moon reflecting off the slow-moving water. The night felt charged, like something unseen was shifting beneath the surface. Ronan exhaled.
There's something I need to show you.
I raised an eyebrow. That sounds ominous. He smirked slightly.
Trust me?
I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, because I did, more than I should, but I nodded and he stepped closer, his fingers brushing the sleeve of my jacket before pulling it down slightly, baring my shoulder. My skin tingled at his touch, warmth spreading through me.
There's a mark.
He murmured. I frowned. What?
Here.
His fingers traced a spot near my collarbone.
It's faint, but it's there.
I looked down, twisting slightly. At first I didn't see anything. Then, under the moonlight, I saw it, a faint silver mark, almost like a scar but smoother, like it had always been a part of me. I sucked in a breath. What is this? Ronan's eyes met mine, something unreadable in them.
It means you're my mate.
The world seemed to tilt. I took a step back. Number, that's not... I shook my head. I didn't... His gaze was steady.
It was always going to happen, Lena.
My pulse hammered. That doesn't make sense. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose... He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming.
Neither did I.
I swallowed hard. The mark burned now. Not painfully, but insistently, like it knew something I didn't. Ronan's voice was quiet.
It's not just a symbol. It's a bond. It ties us together, whether we fight it or not.
I exhaled sharply, rubbing my fingers over the mark. So that's it? I'm just yours? His jaw tightened.
No,
His voice was rough.
it's not about ownership, Lena. It's about connection.
I scoffed. Oh, great. So now I'm just supposed to be connected to you forever? His lips pressed together.
That's not how it works.
Then how does it work? My voice rose. Because no one ever told me I'd wake up one day with a damn mark that says I belong to someone. Ronan ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated.
It's not about belonging.
Then what is it about? His golden eyes locked onto mine.
Fate.
The word sent a strange shiver through me. Fate, I never believed in that kind of thing, but the mark on my skin said otherwise. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. So what happens now? Ronan hesitated, then softer.
You have to decide.
I frowned. Decide what? His hand lifted like he was about to touch me again, but he stopped himself.
Whether you accept it.
The weight of his words settled between us. If I accepted it, there was no turning back. But if I didn't, something told me that wouldn't be so simple either. I never thought I'd have to make a decision this life-altering. Just weeks ago, my biggest worries were mundane. Work deadlines, weekend plans, figuring out my future like any normal person. But now, normal is a word that no longer belongs to me. Normal shattered the moment I realized I wasn't even human. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the weight of that truth pressed on me. The girl I once was, the girl who laughed at horror movies and rolled her eyes at supernatural conspiracies, was gone. In her place stood something else, something awakening. My heart raced, my breathing shallow. Do I trust Ronan? He swears he is not my enemy, but how can I be sure? But his presence pulls me in like gravity, yet my instincts scream at me to run. My body betrays me, drawn to him in ways I can't explain, but my mind refuses to surrender so easily. What if he's just another manipulator in this world of secrets and lies? Escape. The thought flares up like a dying ember, a desperate attempt to hold on to the illusion of choice. I could run, disappear, slip back into the life I once had. Pretend none of this ever happened. But is that even an option? I glance down at my hands, at the way my fingertips tremble, not from fear, but from something deeper, a hunger, a restlessness. My body isn't just mine anymore. It's changing, reshaping itself into something wild, something primal. A beast I never knew existed, yet has always been inside me, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that moment is now. I swallow hard, my throat dry. What is my fate? Am I truly a werewolf or something more? The questions spiral through my mind like a storm, relentless and unforgiving. I don't have the luxury of time anymore. I can't afford to sit in this limbo, drowning in my own uncertainty. I have to make a decision, a real one, not one based on fear but on power. No more running, no more doubting. Whatever I choose, I will stand by it, no matter the cost. Because one thing is certain, I will never be the same again. The wind carried whispers of something unseen, something watching. I walked through the forest, trying to ignore the weight pressing on my shoulders. Every step forward felt like I was being pulled in two directions, one toward Ronan, the other toward Dorian. I hated it. I wasn't the girl who stood in the middle, unsure of what to do. I made choices, I took action. But right now, my mind was a tangled mess of emotions and instincts, and neither one was giving me a clear answer. Ronan was steady, protective. He saw me as his mate, something written in fate. But Dorian? He was like a fire burning too close, dangerous, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. and somewhere in the middle of it all, the crimson fangs were coming. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, scanning the trees. The pack was preparing, training. A fight was coming whether I wanted it or not. But was I ready?
Your stance is all wrong.
I turned to find Dorian leaning against a tree, arms crossed. His dark hair fell over his forehead, half shielding those sharp golden eyes. I wasn't aware I was standing incorrectly. I shot back. He smirked.
Not standing, thinking.
I folded my arms. And how exactly does one think incorrectly? Dorian pushed off the tree, closing the space between us in slow, measured steps.
You hesitate, you second guess. That'll get you hurt.
I frowned. I don't hesitate.
You're hesitating right now.
My jaw clenched. He had a way of twisting words, making me feel like he could see through me. It was annoying. And worse, he wasn't wrong. You came out here to fight? I asked.
I came out here to find you.
He said smoothly. Something in his voice sent warmth through my chest, but I shoved it down. You think I'm just going to throw myself at you because you say things like that? Dorian chuckled, low and amused.
Number, but I do think you're more drawn to me than you want to admit.
I scoffed, but before I could reply, a sharp howl broke through the trees. Instantly, Dorian's expression changed.
Trouble,
He muttered. I turned toward the sound, heart hammering. A second later, a figure burst through the trees, one of the pack warriors, panting, eyes wide. They're here! My mind twisted. Dorian was already moving.
Where?
South Ridge, the warrior said. They're testing the borders. Testing, which meant they weren't launching a full attack. Yet they were trying to scare us, see how strong we were. A warning. I felt a presence behind me before I even turned. Ronan. He was dressed in dark clothes, a blade strapped to his side. His gaze flicked between me and Dorian, but he didn't acknowledge whatever tension still lingered in the air.
You're afraid?
He said, and it wasn't a question. I lifted my chin. Of course! He exhaled like he expected me to argue.
Stay close.
Then he was gone, disappearing into the trees. Dorian gave me a knowing look.
See? You hesitate for him.
I hesitate for no one, I snapped, shoving past him, but the truth was Dorian had planted a seed of doubt. I was pulled between them, between fate and fire. And now, with the crimson fangs at our borders, I had to figure out where I stood. Because soon I wouldn't have the luxury of choice. I'd have to fight. Then one of the pack members came and told us that the enemies are gone. Everyone got relaxed for now. Ronan stepped closer, his dark eyes searching mine for something. Hesitation, regret, anything that might make me stay.
So did you decide?
His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, like he already knew the answer and hated it. I swallowed hard. Yes, I have decided to get back to my normal life. Silence, then.
What?
Ronan's brows knitted together.
After everything? You want to go back?
I nodded, forcing myself to stand firm. Yes, I do. Ronan exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening.
You're not safe, especially alone.
Before I could reply, Dorian scoffed.
You can't force her.
Exactly, I said, crossing my arms. Ronan turned to face Dorian, his patience visibly thinning.
I'm not forcing her. I'm trying to protect her.
I sighed. I appreciate that, Ronan. But I want my life back. Whatever it was, however messy, I still love it. His gaze darkened.
You'll regret it soon.
I straightened my spine. At least it'll be my choice. So if things go wrong, I won't blame you. Ronan stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. But he said nothing. Dorian, however, smiled, just a flicker of satisfaction that vanished too quickly. But I caught it. He wanted me gone. That should have been my warning. But instead I turned around and started walking, heading back toward town. I didn't look back at Ronan. I told myself I didn't care about him, his pack, or whatever battles they were fighting. I just wanted to go home. But then pain. It started as a dull ache in my shoulder, then sharpened, twisting under my skin. I pulled my jacket aside and glanced down. The mark, it was shifting. It wasn't changing shape exactly, but it looked deeper, like it was embedding itself into me, branding me in a way I didn't understand. For a second, my instinct screamed at me to turn back, to ask Ronan what was happening, but I ignored it. I forced my feet forward and walked on. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion pressed down on me like a weight. I just wanted to step inside, shut the door, and pretend none of this ever happened. I turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. "Hello, dear." My voice came out weaker than I expected. Hannah spun around, her arms crossed. "Where the hell were you?" she demanded. "Why didn't you pick up my calls? I was freaking out." I rubbed my forehead. "Sorry, my phone was on silent. I was about to call you." Hannah's glare softened, but only slightly. "You can't do that again. I care about you, okay?" I smiled, then pulled her into a hug. "I know, and I'm sorry." She hugged me back, then pulled away, but as soon as she did, her eyes landed on my shoulder. Her brows furrowed. "Hey, what's that?" My heart stuttered. "What?" She pointed. Is that a tattoo?" I hesitated, then forced a casual shrug. "Yeah, do you like it?" Hannah leaned in, inspecting it closely. "It's awesome. Looks ancient." Ancient! The word settled in my mind like a stone, but before I could spiral, I forced myself to shake it off. "How was your day?" Hannah lit up. "Oh, I met this guy. Not exactly handsome, but he's rich." I smirked. "So you're planning to sweet-talk him out of some cash, huh?" "Clever." She grinned. "You know me too well." I laughed, shaking my head, but then pain again. This time sharper, like something inside me was tearing. My knees buckled. "Lena?" Hannah's hands were on my shoulders, panic flashing in her eyes. The pain disappeared as fast as it came, but Hannah was still staring at my shoulder. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. I opened my mouth, then closed it. She saw it. She saw the mark change. I had a cramp." I lied. Hannah folded her arms. "Bull, your tattoo just changed, right in front of me." I went still. Then slowly I turned my head and looked at the mark. It was even more prominent than before. Hannah's voice softened. "Lena, tell me the truth." I took a breath, then another, then, "You won't believe me." "Try me." I hesitated, but there was no way out of this, so I said it. "I saw a werewolf." Hannah blinked, then snorted. "A werewolf?" "Not just one, a whole pack. I spent time with them." My voice was barely above a whisper. "And this isn't a tattoo, it's a real mark." Hannah's face went blank. "Are you messing with me?" "No," I whispered. "Explain this then. How did my mark change?" Hannah opened her mouth, then closed it. She had nothing. "Something is definitely wrong," she muttered. I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, everything is wrong." I hesitated, then added, "A man named Ronan told me this mark means we're mates." Hannah's expression twisted. "Mates?" "Yeah," I swallowed. "He said it's fate." She ran a hand through her hair. "And then what?" "I left," I admitted. "I don't want any part of it." Hannah shook her head. I don't even know what to say. But then suddenly her eyes gleamed with something else. "Wait a second. If this mark is real, we could use it." I frowned. "Use it?" She grinned. "We could post about it, make reels, go viral. We could say you're turning into a werewolf after getting attacked. Imagine how much money we could make." I stared at her. You can't be serious. I am. Think about it. We don't have much money, but once we go viral... Hannah, my voice was sharp. This isn't a joke. Her grin faltered. I know, but it's an opportunity. I shook my head. Number, we shouldn't expose this. For our own safety. Hannah sighed. As you wish. And just like that, she let it go. We had dinner. We talked about nothing. Then we went to sleep. But long after Hannah's breathing evened out beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, because deep down I knew this wasn't over. Cold, damp, my body pressed into the earth, every inch of me stiff as if I had been lying there for hours. I blinked against the thick fog, my breath coming out in short, visible bursts. My fingers dug into the ground, confirming what my senses were already screaming. I was outside in the middle of the forest. I pushed myself up, my heart thudding, not in fear but in pure disbelief. How did I get here? The trees loomed around me, their shadows stretching long under the dim light. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to my skin like a second layer. I wrapped my arms around myself, rubbing my hands along my arms, trying to generate some warmth. Then movement. A figure emerged from the mist. Ronan, the handsome man who was protective toward me, kind toward me, confident about himself. He was looking different. He stepped forward, his familiar face partially obscured by the fog. His expression was readable. He was tensed, he was afraid of something, and something about him was different. The way his shoulders were tense, the way his hands curled into fists. He wasn't just standing there, he was bracing himself. For what? I swallowed. Where am I? My voice sounded foreign, shaky. Ronan's eyes met mine, filled with something raw.
Remember one thing, Lena.
He stepped closer, his presence grounding me even in the eerie stillness of the forest.
Only I am your true mate. I deserve you, and you deserve me.
His voice was firm, almost desperate, like he was trying to get through to me, trying to make me believe it before something or someone took me away. I opened my mouth, 1,000 questions burning in my mind. But before I could speak, he was gone. Not like he walked away, not like he turned and ran. He simply vanished as if the wind had swallowed him whole. The silence that followed was unnatural. Then the wind shifted. Leaves rustled violently, the air whipping around me, carrying a presence with it. And then I saw him. A man standing just beyond the trees, his face obscured by shadows. He wasn't moving, just watching. Something in my gut told me I didn't want him any closer. I took a step back. He took a step forward. A shiver ran down my spine, my instinct screaming at me to move. I turned, ready to run, and then I woke up. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached. My room was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. The dim glow from the streetlights outside barely lit the space. I sat up, pressing a hand to my forehead. A dream, just a dream. I turned my head. Hannah was still beside me, her breathing deep and even. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to relax. Then my eyes dropped to my shoulder. The mark. I pulled my sleeve down, expecting it to look the same, but no. The edges were darker, the lines sharper. It wasn't just growing, it was changing. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I needed water. Slipping out of bed, I made my way to the kitchen, careful not to wake Hannah. The floor was cold against my feet as I grabbed a glass and filled it at the sink. As I took a sip, my gaze drifted toward the window, and then I saw him, the same man from my dream. Standing outside, watching me, my breath hitched, my grip on the glass tightened. He was real. I blinked, gone. The space where he had been was empty, as if he had never been there at all. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I grabbed the curtain and yanked it closed, stepping away from the window like it might reach out and pull me through. It's nothing, just your imagination. You're exhausted. I checked the clock on the stove. 3 a.m., too late or too early to be seeing things. Without another glance toward the window, I hurried back to bed, slipping under the covers and pulling them up to my chin. Hannah shifted beside me, mumbling something in her sleep. I inched closer to her, my body tense. The house was silent again, too silent. I shut my eyes, willing sleep to come, but even as I drifted off, the feeling lingered. Someone had been watching me, and whoever it was, they weren't finished. I woke up to the smell of coffee, strong, rich, and slightly burnt, the way Hannah always made it. Stretching under the covers, I blinked against the morning light slipping through the curtains. My body ached, not from physical exhaustion, but from everything weighing on my mind. The mark, the dream, the man in the window. I pushed those thoughts aside as I sat up. Across the room, Hannah was perched on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a sly little smile on her lips. But the second she saw me move, she slipped the phone into her pocket like a kid caught sneaking candy before dinner. "Good morning, darling," she said, grinning as she sipped from her oversized mug. Something felt off. "Morning," I replied, rubbing my eyes. Hannah set her mug down and hopped to her feet, stretching like a cat. "Well, I have a big day ahead. I'm going out with my new guy." "New guy?" I arched an eyebrow. "John, he's not drop-dead gorgeous, but he's loaded." She winked. I sighed, shaking my head. "Do you ever date people just because you like them?" "Lena, darling, money makes the world go round, and if a man wants to take me to a 5-star restaurant and shower me with gifts, who am I to refuse?" She tossed her hair dramatically. "Anyway, I need to shower, trying to look my best." She grabbed a red dress from the closet and laid it on the bed, giving me a cheeky smile before disappearing into the bathroom. The second I heard the water running, my eyes flicked to her phone on the table. Hannah had been acting weird lately, hiding things, changing topics, avoiding eye contact. Something was up. I hesitated for a second before reaching for the phone. My pulse quickened as I swiped at the screen. Locked. I frowned, trying to guess the passcode. First attempt, wrong. Second attempt, wrong. Then I thought about how predictable Hannah could be. I typed in her dog's name. The phone unlocked. I held my breath, quickly scrolling through her social media, and then I saw it. A video of me. I pressed play, my hands tightening around the device as Hannah's voice filled the room. "Guys, I am so scared," she whispered dramatically. "My roommate got bitten by a werewolf, and now she's changing, just like in the movies. Here's the proof." The camera angle shifted. Hannah, standing over me while I slept, carefully pulled my oversized shirt down my shoulder, exposing my mark. "Did you see it?" she continued. "Comment below what you think. I'll update you on what happens next." The video ended. I couldn't breathe. She filmed me. While I was sleeping, she exposed my mark, and it was viral. 500,000 views, thousands of comments, some laughing, some believing it, some calling it fake. But the fact remained, 500,000 people had seen that video. My hands shook with anger. How could she do this? Without asking me, without even mentioning it. Breathe, Lena. Think. I needed to erase it. I quickly deleted the post, watching the numbers vanish before my eyes. Then I locked her phone and placed it back exactly where it was. I grabbed my coffee, taking slow sips to calm myself. My hands still trembled. The betrayal burned in my chest, but I forced my expression to stay neutral. The bathroom door swung open, steam spilling into the room. Hannah stepped out, towel wrapped around her body, humming to herself. She glanced at the table. Her phone was untouched. She exhaled, completely unaware. "Hey," she said, running a brush through her wet hair. "Are you heading to work today?" "Yeah," I said casually, lifting my mug. "Of course." She smiled, completely at ease, completely unaware. I set my coffee down and grabbed a towel before heading into the bathroom. As I stripped off my clothes, my eyes flickered to the mirror and I froze. The mark had changed. Before, it had been one symbol. Now there were two. I traced my fingers over it, trying to make sense of the shift. It wasn't just getting more prominent, it was evolving. "What does this mean?" I whispered, but the mark offered no answers. I exhaled sharply and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water run over my skin, trying to wash away the frustration, the confusion, the betrayal. Hannah had crossed a line and she was going to pay for it, but not yet, not until I had a plan. By the time I got out, Hannah was dressed and slipping on her heels. "See you tonight," she chirped. I forced a smile. "Yeah, see you." The door closed behind her. I sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through my damp hair. I had no idea what was happening to me, but one thing was clear. Hannah wasn't on my side, and now I had to watch my back. I walked down the street, my hands stuffed deep in my coat pockets. The city lights flickered, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence between my own thoughts. I kept my head down, trying to focus on getting home, but something felt off. Like a whisper against my skin, a presence lingering just at the edge of my awareness. Then I saw him, the man from my dreams, the same one who had stared at me through my kitchen window. He stood near a tree, half hidden in the shadows, his posture rigid, his eyes locked onto me. A chill, not from the cold, but something deeper, crawled along my spine. I sucked in a breath and picked up my pace, refusing to look back. The closer I got to my workplace, the safer I felt. The moment I stepped inside, I finally let myself breathe. But when I walked home after my shift, he was gone. My eyes darted over every corner, every alley, searching for him. Nothing. Just the normal evening crowd, the occasional stray cat slipping between parked cars. Maybe I was imagining things, maybe not. When I stepped into the apartment, Hannah was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with a deep frown. I knew exactly why. She had seen her post was gone, and the best part? She couldn't even bring it up because she had never told me about it in the first place. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smirking. "Hello, Hannah," I said casually, dropping my bag on the counter. "So how was your date?" "Boring," she muttered, barely looking up. Liar. "Going out for a walk," she added, already grabbing her coat. "Need some fresh air." I watched her step outside, her shoulders tense. Good, she deserved to feel uneasy. Once she was gone, I changed into my loose sleeping shirt and headed to the bathroom to wash up. I splashed cold water on my face, my fingers pressing against my temples. My whole body felt strange, like something was shifting beneath my skin. Then I caught my reflection. I stepped closer to the mirror, my breath slowing. My collarbone, it looked different, more pronounced, like the bones were pushing against my skin in a way they hadn't before. I yanked my shirt over my head and checked my knees. Same thing, the structure was changing. Panic rose in my throat. No, this wasn't happening. I staggered out of the bathroom, my vision blurring. My legs buckled and I collapsed in the middle of the living room. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Then, crack! I screamed, not in pain but in shock. I felt my body changing, my shoulders expanded, broadening into something stronger, something inhuman. My chest cracked, shifting as thick, dark fur pushed through my skin. My fingers stretched, elongating into sharp, deadly claws. I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't imagining it. I was turning, my clothes shredded, the fabric no match for the raw power taking over my body. My face stretched forward, my jaw snapping into place as my teeth grew into lethal fangs. I could hear everything, the buzz of streetlights, the rustle of leaves miles away, the steady rhythmic heartbeat of something living, something small, something prey. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled under the weight of my own body. I was on all fours, my limbs alien yet familiar. I turned my head toward the mirror, and what I saw made my breath hitch. A beast stared back, golden eyes, a powerful, monstrous form. I had become a werewolf. Panic surged through me, instinct kicking in. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I bolted toward the back door, shoving it open with more force than I intended. The cool night air hit my skin, or rather, my fur, but I didn't stop. I needed to get away before... Lena? I froze. Hannah. She stood a few feet away, phone raised, recording. A growl rumbled in my throat, deep and primal. I bared my fangs. Hannah's eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw fear in them. She ran, and I ran too, but in the opposite direction, toward the woods. The second my paws hit the forest floor, an instinct buried deep inside me awakened. My muscles felt alive, my body stronger than I'd ever imagined. I moved faster than I thought possible, weaving between trees with an agility that no human could ever match. But I couldn't control it. I stumbled, tripping over my own limbs, crashing into the underbrush. I was a newborn in this form, unsteady, untrained. Then hunger hit, a raw, aching hunger that clawed at my insides. My ears twitched, catching the faintest movement. My gaze snapped to the side. Something small, something warm. A rat. I lunged, my instincts driving me forward before I could even think. My claws caught it, my teeth sank into its flesh, and... voices, men. I whipped my head around, my ears twitching at the sound of footsteps. They had seen me. I didn't wait. I bolted, pushing my body beyond its limits, running until their voices faded into the distance. When I finally stopped, I collapsed against a tree, my breath heavy, my body trembling. I had changed, I had become something else, and there was no turning back now. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes was the damp earth beneath me. My fingers pressed into it as I pushed myself up, groggy and disoriented. The sky above was streaked with early morning light, but the trees around me stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying ever so slightly. I wasn't a werewolf anymore. I looked down at my hands. Human. My skin was smooth, no fur, no claws, my legs shaky but normal. My breath came fast as I glanced around, trying to make sense of everything. The forest, it felt oddly familiar, like I had been here before, even though I knew I hadn't. Why did it feel like I belonged here? A cold shudder traced my spine, but I shook it off and forced myself to stand. My body ached, but nothing felt broken. I needed to get home before someone found me like this. I stumbled through the woods, my legs sore from whatever happened last night. I barely remembered rushing into the forest, only fragments of fur, hunger, and the sheer power coursing through me. But now it was all gone, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. By the time I reached my house, my steps were steadier. The door creaked as I slipped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hannah was asleep on the couch, her phone resting on the coffee table beside her. I moved carefully, my bare feet silent against the floor. My fingers closed around her phone and I swiped it open. Social media was already pulled up. and there it was, exactly what I feared. My video. I stepped back into the hall, my breath shallow as I played it. Guys, I am back. My roommate transformed into a werewolf. It's a full moon, and here's the footage of her change. Hannah's voice was chipper, excited, like she was announcing a new makeup haul. But then the screen shifted, and there I was on video. My body twisted, bones cracking, muscles stretching. Hannah had captured every single second. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was an execution. If the wrong people saw this, hunters, other packs, the government, I was as good as exposed. My finger hovered over the delete button. Before I could press it, a voice snapped behind me. What are you doing? I turned sharply. Hannah stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face tight with suspicion. It's my house, I shot back, gripping her phone tighter. Her eyes flickered to the screen and her expression darkened. Are you going through my phone? How dare you? Are you spying on me now? I let out a sharp laugh. You posted my video without my consent, twice, and you have the nerve to call me a spy? Her eyes widened. So it was you who deleted my viral video? I clenched my jaw. I should have gone to the police instead. Hannah took a step closer, eyes blazing. Go ahead and I'll tell them exactly what you are. Silence fell between us, thick and dangerous. My hands shook, but not from fear, from rage. What's wrong with you? Hannah's lip curled. What's wrong with me? Everything is wrong with you, Lena. I was just trying to make us some money and you ruined it. I exhaled sharply. I can't believe you. Believe it, she snapped. Now give me my phone. I didn't. Instead, I pressed delete, erasing the video from her gallery before she lunged forward and snatched the phone out of my hand. Her glare could have cut glass. Don't touch my phone again. Then don't film me, she scoffed. You're a monster. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. Look who's talking. I didn't wait for her response. I turned, storming into my room. I grabbed a towel, locked myself in the bathroom, and turned on the shower. Hot water poured over me, but it didn't wash away the betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. My hands ran over my arms, my shoulders, my collarbone. Everything was back to normal. No fur, no claws, no sharp, elongated teeth. Except for one thing, the mark on my shoulder. It was even more defined now, the symbols clearer than before. I exhaled slowly. What the hell was happening to me? I finished my shower, got dressed, and left for work. But as I walked down the street, a strange feeling settled in my gut. I was being followed. I took a sharp turn into an alley, then glanced back. Hannah. She was trailing behind me, keeping her distance, but her eyes were locked on me like a predator tracking prey. I turned fully and crossed my arms. Why are you following me? She smirked, taking a step closer. I want to see it happen again. Go away. She tilted her head. Or what? You'll shift and chase me off? I gritted my teeth. I said, go away. Before she could respond, a rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. Both of us froze. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. Hannah's face paled. What was that? I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the bushes. Then, in a blur of movement, something lunged toward us. A powerful force grabbed me, wrapping around me like iron chains. Before I could react, I was yanked into the woods. Lena, help! Hannah's scream was the last thing I heard before everything blurred. I struggled, thrashing, trying to shift. But nothing happened. My body refused to change. I was trapped. There were 3 of them, werewolves, one carrying me, one carrying Hannah, and another running alongside them. I fought, but the grip on me was unbreakable. Then suddenly the werewolf carrying me slowed down and gently set me on the ground. Not harshly, not violently, but with purpose. I looked up and saw them, dozens of them, a pack. A man stepped forward, his presence radiating authority, his golden eyes locked onto mine.
There's no need to fight.
He said smoothly.
We're not your enemies.
Hannah let out a strangled noise, her hands trembling. Please, please let us go. She's new. She doesn't know anything, I swear. The man studied me, his expression unreadable.
We didn't take you to harm you.
I swallowed hard. Then why are we here? He took another step forward.
I am Cain, the leader of this pack. We brought you here for a purpose.
My hands curled into fists. Purpose? Cain's gaze was unwavering.
As you've now awakened, it's time you learn the truth.
I narrowed my eyes. What truth? His voice was steady.
You are one of us.
I felt my breath hitch. Excuse me? Cain exhaled slowly.
You heard me. This is your pack.
I shook my head. That's impossible,
Is it?
Cain said, and
Then why do you have the mark?
my stomach twisted. Hannah, still shaking, whispered, Lena, does this mean you're their leader? Cain smirked.
In a way, but she will have to prove herself.
Hannah's face lit up. This is amazing. I never thought I'd be part of something like this. Cain cut her off.
You're not.
The pack chuckled. Hannah's expression dropped. Then why take me? Cain shrugged.
We weren't sure which one of you was Lena.
I exhaled, my mind racing. Then Cain motioned toward the trees.
Come with me.
We followed, and when I saw where they were taking us, my breath caught. A fortress. Hidden deep within the woods, towering and ancient, its presence was undeniable, and somehow I knew this place would change everything. Cain lowered himself onto the largest chair in the room, an obvious symbol of dominance. As soon as he did, the rest of the pack followed suit, filling the space with an unspoken hierarchy I wasn't familiar with. Hannah slid onto the seat beside me, her fingers latching onto mine. Her grip was warm but jittery, excited, nervous, or both. I wasn't sure if she was worried for me or thrilled to be witnessing whatever was about to unfold. Cain leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his sharp gaze locked onto mine like a predator assessing its prey.
Lena, what do you know about your mother?
The question landed like a punch to the gut. My lips parted, but my brain scrambled for a response. Excuse me? I finally managed. Cain repeated, his tone as steady as before.
Your mother.
I clenched my jaw. That's none of your business.
No,
Cain countered smoothly.
it's very much my business.
Something about the certainty in his voice sent a pulse of unease through me. My fingers twitched in Hannah's grasp, but I held my ground. Tell me clearly, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. Why am I here? Am I a prisoner? Cain leaned back, his expression unreadable.
No, you're not a prisoner. You're here because you need to know the truth.
I folded my arms. Go on. Cain's eyes flickered with something, satisfaction maybe, before he said,
Your mother was our alpha's mate.
My body went rigid. The words crashed into me, leaving my mind tangled in knots. That's not possible. I hadn't seen my mother since I was a child. No memories, no pictures, no bedtime stories, whispered in a soft voice, just emptiness. I had grown up in an orphanage, with nothing but the occasional question that never had answers. Was she a werewolf too? My voice barely rose above a whisper. Cain's lips curled slightly.
Obviously. Now listen closely.
I swallowed hard, gripping my own arms as he continued.
Your mother was strong, capable. She led this pack alongside our alpha for years. She was respected, feared, and you are her daughter. That mark on your shoulder proves it.
My breath hitched. The mark. I barely registered Hannah's grip tightening on my hand. Kane shifted slightly, eyes darkening with intensity.
I am the beta's son. My father was your father's closest friend. Now, as fate has decided, I am the next alpha of this pack.
The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm cracks the sky. Then Kane said something that made my entire body lock up.
And according to our traditions, I am your mate.
I blinked. What?
You are mine. We are mates.
His voice held no doubt, no hesitation.
That mark on your shoulder, it is there for a reason.
Before I could even begin to process that, he reached for his own shirt and pulled it down over his shoulder. There, just like mine, was a mark, but his was slightly different. His only had one symbol. 1,000 questions fought for space in my mind, but one stood out above the rest. If I was Kane's mate, then what was Ronan? Was he a lie? A trap? Or was Kane the one deceiving me? Kane must have read the confusion on my face because he tilted his head slightly.
You're wondering why your mark has two symbols, aren't you?
I hesitated, then gave a small nod. His gaze darkened.
There is a curse. A bad one. A man named Ronan tried to ruin this pack, our traditions, everything we stand for. He was punished for it, and now he will try to manipulate you into believing he is your mate.
My stomach clenched. Kane leaned in slightly.
He isn't your mate, Lena. I am. Ask anyone here.
I hesitated, my throat tightening. A beat of silence stretched between us before I spoke again. Who is Ronan? I made sure to keep my expression blank, pretending I had never met him. Kane exhaled sharply.
Ronan was once a member of this pack, but he was greedy. He wanted the alpha position, but he didn't deserve it. So he was cast out.
I sat there, struggling to breathe normally. This was too much, too many revelations at once. My mind felt like it was being yanked in two different directions. Hannah's voice broke through the haze. Lena, don't rush into anything. I turned to her, surprised by the raw honesty in her voice. Whatever you decide, she said, I'll stand by you. I know I screwed up before, but I'm your best friend. That hasn't changed. Her words sent a strange kind of relief through me. I had been furious at her before, had felt completely betrayed. But in this moment, she was the only familiar thing in a sea of strangers. Kane stood, his movement slow, controlled.
Take your time.
His eyes lingered on me as if he was already certain of my decision.
But once you decide, you'll have to prove yourself.
I narrowed my eyes. Prove myself how?
You will have to face one of our strongest female warriors. If you win, you will take your rightful place as my Luna.
I stared at him. This was insane, absolutely insane. And if I decide to leave? I asked. Kane shrugged.
That is your choice.
I studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Surprisingly, I found none. For the first time since I had been brought here, I felt a small measure of relief. There was no pressure, no force, at least not yet. One of Kane's men gestured toward the hallway.
You should rest. We've prepared rooms for both of you.
I exchanged a look with Hannah before rising to my feet. We were led through a winding corridor, the walls made of stone and lined with torches that flickered against the darkness. When we reached our rooms, I realized they were right next to each other. Hannah followed me inside mine, shutting the door behind her. Lena, I know you're stressed, she said quietly. But listen, at least they're giving you a choice. You can leave if you want. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling. Yeah, that's the only good thing. She hesitated before stepping back toward the door. Get some rest, okay? I gave a small nod. watching as she disappeared into her own room. Once I was alone, I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint glow of the torches outside my window. My mind was a storm of thoughts. Cain, my mother, Ronan, the mark, the supposed curse. I wasn't sure who to trust. But one thing was certain, I needed answers, and I needed them soon. I was standing in a graveyard, the air still, the silence unsettling. The night stretched endlessly around me, and yet I wasn't afraid. There was something familiar about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. My gaze drifted over the tombstones until one name caught my attention, Mrs. Gracie Lington. I stepped closer, my breath catching. The name pulled at something deep inside me, a feeling of connection I couldn't explain. Then a voice whispered through the darkness.
"You will have to break the curse, my child."
A chill wrapped around me, but I wasn't cold. I turned sharply, scanning the cemetery. My eyes landed on a figure, a woman dressed in black, standing about 20 feet away. She didn't move, she just stood there, watching. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. I took a cautious step forward, then another. When I finally saw her face, the air in my lungs turned solid. She looked like me, not just a little. It was as if I was staring at an older version of myself. Same eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same lips pressed into an unreadable expression. I knew instantly. "My mother," I breathed. I reached out, but before my fingers could grasp the reality of her presence, she disappeared, dissolving into the air like she had never existed. And just like that, I woke up. The dream felt real, too real. My eyes flew open, the darkness of my room swallowing me whole. My pulse was quick, my breaths uneven. I lay still, letting the remnants of the dream settle. Break the curse. I turned my head toward the clock. 4 a.m. There was no way I was falling back asleep. I stared at the window, the trees swaying gently outside. A part of me wanted to believe it was just a dream, but deep down I knew better. That wasn't just a dream, that was a message. I slipped out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The fortress was eerily silent, everyone still lost in sleep. My feet moved instinctively, guiding me through dimly lit corridors until I reached a large open space, a backyard, massive and untouched. The air was crisp, filled with the distant chirping of birds. For a moment I almost let myself get lost in the beauty of it, but then something felt off. A strange smell, not rotting, not entirely unbearable, but wrong. I followed it. It led me deeper into the yard, past patches of wildflowers and scattered stones, until my eyes landed on a grave. The same grave from my dream, Mrs. Gracie Lington. She was buried here. My hands trembled as I crouched beside it, scanning the memorial. But the scent, that scent, was coming from the ground itself. Without thinking, I started digging. My fingers tore through the soil, my breathing uneven, my mind screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't, I had to know, and then I hit something. My fingers scraped against fabric. A body. I dug faster, clearing enough dirt to reveal the form of a man, but there was no name, no marker, no recognition. Why was he buried next to my mother if he wasn't important enough to be acknowledged? I sat back, staring at the body, my thoughts a storm of confusion. None of this made sense. Why was I sent to an orphanage if my mother had a place here? Did she abandon me? Was I never wanted? I swallowed hard and refilled the grave, smoothing the dirt as best as I could. Morning would be here soon, and I needed answers. I needed to go home. By 6 a.m. I was ready. I took a quick shower, dressed, and made my way to Kane's room. I didn't hesitate before knocking. The door swung open almost instantly, and Kane stood there, already dressed, his sharp eyes scanning me.
Good morning, Lena.
He said smoothly. Good morning, I replied, keeping my voice even. He studied me, then asked,
Is everything all right?
I held his gaze. Yes, and I've made my decision. A flicker of interest crossed his face, but his tone remained unreadable.
So?
He leaned against the doorframe.
Do you accept it? Do you accept yourself as our alpha's mate?
I kept my voice steady. First, I need to know more about my mother. Kane exhaled, then gave a small nod.
Right. Meet me at the dining table in 5 minutes.
By the time I reached the dining area, most of Kane's pack was already seated, waiting for breakfast. The tension in the air was subtle, but I could feel it. They were watching me. I took my seat, forcing my hands to remain still on my lap. Moments later, Kane entered, his presence commanding as he sat across from me. His voice was calm but firm.
Lena, your father loved your mother deeply. She loved him too, but after a war with our enemies, she suffered a head injury. Something changed in her after that. She became different.
My fingers curled slightly. Kane continued.
She was already pregnant when it happened. As time passed, her behavior grew worse. Your father tried to keep things together, but her mind, her instincts, became unstable. Then you were born.
I felt my throat tighten.
At first, everything seemed fine.
Kane said, watching me carefully.
But then your mother started seeing you as a threat. She tried to harm you. She tried to harm your father. We had no choice. We took you away to keep you safe.
I couldn't speak. Kane's voice softened as if he expected me to understand.
She later turned on your father too. And then Ronan struck. He saw an opportunity. Your father was gone, and if Ronan could take your mother down, he could claim the alpha position for himself.
My stomach clenched. Ronan attacked her, Kane said.
But my father saw everything. We exposed Ronan's true nature and cast him out of the pack.
Silence fell over the table. Kane exhaled slowly, his eyes locked onto mine.
Your mother's body is still in the backyard because we honor her. She was powerful, respected, and now you are her daughter. You carry her strength.
I felt trapped, like the walls of the fortress had somehow moved closer.
Lena,
Kane leaned forward slightly, voice low.
you are meant to take your place here. You are meant to be strong.
Everything inside me screamed no. If Ronan was as dangerous as they claimed, then why had he never tried to trap me? Why had he let me go? I took a deep breath and met Kane's gaze. I've decided. The anticipation in the room thickened. Kane's expression remained composed, but there was an expectation in his eyes. I gave him my answer. I'm going back home, that's final. For the first time, Kane's face shifted into something unmistakable, disappointment. The room fell silent. I had just thrown a match into a field of dry grass, and I had no idea what was about to burn. Kane leaned back in his chair, watching me with that knowing smirk that always made me feel like I was playing a game I didn't even know the rules to.
Think twice before making your decision.
He said smoothly.
But in the end, it's up to you.
I met his gaze without hesitation. I'm already sure. His smirk deepened like he could see right through me.
You're going to Ronan, aren't you?
No. I kept my voice steady. I have no business with Ronan. I just want my life back, the way it was before all of this. Kane didn't argue. He just smiled, the kind of smile that made my skin itch, like he was indulging me.
Before you leave, there's something I want to show you.
I hesitated. What is it?
The tombstone.
My chest tightened. My mother's?
Yes, you should see it before you go.
A lump formed in my throat, but I forced myself to nod. Okay, show me. Cain stood, and without another word, he led the way out of the hall. A few of his guards followed as we stepped into the cool morning air. The fortress was eerily silent at this hour, the world holding its breath. We entered the backyard, and there it was, the tombstone I'd seen before, standing alone in the earth. My mother's name was carved into it, and something about the way it stood there, untouched by time, made my chest tighten even more. Cain gestured toward it.
She's here, with us, and she always will be.
I stepped closer, brushing my fingers over the stone's rough surface. A strange mix of emotions churned inside me. Grief for the mother I barely knew, anger for the secrets everyone seemed to be keeping from me, and confusion about what I was supposed to believe. For a few moments I just stood there, staring, then I stepped back. I should leave now. Cain tilted his head slightly, studying me.
I hope you don't make the wrong choice.
I'll be fine. He took a slow step forward, his voice dropping just enough to make the words feel heavier.
I am your mate. That will never change. One day, you'll come back here on your own.
I didn't respond. His words wormed their way into my head, planting questions I wasn't ready to ask. Instead, I turned and walked toward Hannah's room. When I pushed open the door, she was standing by the small wooden table, popping a piece of fruit into her mouth like she was about to sit down for breakfast. "Hannah," I said, my voice firm, "we're leaving now." She blinked, chewing slowly. "What, really? Just like that?" "Yes, get your things." She didn't move. "But what about Cain? This place, don't you get it? We could have everything here, power, protection. We could—" "I don't have time for this." My patience was razor thin. "Let's go." Hannah let out a dramatic sigh. "Fine, I'll come." We walked out of the fortress together. Cain didn't come to see me off, and that unsettled me more than it should have. It was like he didn't care that I was leaving, or maybe he already knew I'd be back. The forest was thick, the undergrowth grabbing at our feet as we moved deeper into it. We walked for a while before Hannah groaned. "I'm tired." I exhaled through my nose. "Fine, we'll rest for a few minutes." We sat beneath a giant tree, the shade cool against my skin, but my mind didn't rest. It ran in circles, looping through everything Cain had said, everything he hadn't. After a short break, we continued on. The walk back to town took almost an hour. By the time we reached the house, I felt a brief flicker of relief, like I had finally escaped something. But it didn't last. After resting for a while, eating a quick meal and changing into clean clothes, I did the one thing I told Cain I wouldn't. I went to find Ronan. I walked through the familiar paths of the other forest, searching. It didn't take long before I spotted a familiar face. Dorian. He leaned against a tree, arms crossed, looking like he'd been waiting for me. "Where's Ronan?" I asked. His mouth curled into something between a smirk and a sneer.
That liar? No idea.
I frowned. "Liar? What are you talking about?" Dorian pushed off the tree, stepping closer.
He's not your mate, Lena. He's a liar, a fraud. He destroyed your family. One day, you'll realize that. But by then, it'll be too late.
My stomach knotted. "Who told you that?" Dorian scoffed.
I don't need anyone to tell me. I was there. I saw what he did.
His words made my skin prickle, but I refused to let him see it. "You act like you care, but let's be honest, Dorian, you just want to be alpha." He lifted his chin.
The true alpha will be me. That's not a question. It's a fact. Whether you choose Ronan or not doesn't matter. But if you're smart, you'll choose wisely.
I let out a laugh, sharp and cold. "I feel bad for you, Dorian. You really think you have everything figured out, don't you?" His expression darkened. Clearly, he didn't like being mocked.
Welcome back.
The voice came from behind me, smooth and familiar. I turned. Ronan stood there, his gaze steady on mine. Something inside me twisted. Ronan, I said, if I told you I've accepted this place, what would happen next? His expression shifted slightly.
It's not just about accepting the place, and
He said,
it's about trust. If you don't trust me, there's no point in staying.
I held his gaze. Where do you live?
In my den.
I want to see it. Ronan studied me for a moment before nodding.
Come with me.
He led me through the trees to a hidden space tucked away from the rest of the pack. His den wasn't huge, but it was warm, lived in, a place meant for someone who didn't just exist here, but belonged. Ronan leaned against the wall, watching me.
Why did you come back?
I crossed my arms. I have questions.
Ask.
I met his gaze. Do you know anything about my mother? His jaw tensed.
I see. So you spoke to Cain.
Something about his reaction made my stomach tighten. Ronan exhaled, his expression darkening.
Let me guess. He told you his version of the story, twisted the truth, made himself look like the hero.
His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made me uneasy.
What exactly did he tell you?
Ronan pressed. I hesitated. That he's my mate. Ronan's eyes sharpened.
And?
That's all. He wants me to be his mate. Ronan's gaze didn't waver.
You already said that. What else did he tell you?
His voice was harder now. I forced a casual shrug. Nothing important. Why? Is there something else I should know? It was a test, a trick. I wanted to see how Ronan reacted, to see if he would lie. Ronan's face was unreadable.
Of course not.
Liar. He straightened, stepping toward me.
Only I am your true mate.
I gave a small, empty smile. Yeah. Ronan's eyes flickered like he was searching for something.
Are you hiding something from me?
I met his gaze and lied. Number, I'm here because I trust you. The truth? I didn't trust Ronan. I didn't trust Cain. And I had no idea who to believe. Ronan stood in front of me, his gaze steady, unwavering.
Lena, do you trust me?
His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, a quiet urgency, a need for reassurance. I looked at him, studying the sharp angles of his face, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. Yes, I said, I do. His shoulders relaxed a fraction, but the seriousness in his expression didn't fade.
Listen carefully.
He continued.
If you accept me as your mate, Dorian will have no claim to the alpha position. But that's not the most important thing. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Whether you accept me or not, that doesn't matter. What matters is you. If you stay here with us, the pack will be stronger. As long as you're here, Dorian can't take control unless you choose him. Or me.
I swallowed, absorbing his words.
I know you don't know me well enough to make that choice.
He said.
And I won't pressure you. That's not how this works. But I will ask you, stay. Do whatever you want. Live however you choose. But stay. You'll be the female leader of this pack. No one else will lead until you decide.
It was a lot to process. A huge responsibility. A position I never asked for. But still, I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. I took a breath. Let me think about it. But one thing I can say, for now I'm staying. Ronan's eyes lit up like I had just handed him something precious. He exhaled and a small, almost relieved smile touched his lips. Days passed. Ronan didn't push me, didn't overwhelm me with expectations or demands. Instead, he was just there, always. Not in a suffocating way, but in the little things, making sure I had food before I even thought about eating. leaving fresh clothes near my den without a word, standing by my side when I wandered into the pack's gatherings, even when he didn't say a word. It wasn't loud, showy affection, it was quiet, steady. But Kane's words were still in my mind, sitting like a locked box that I wasn't ready to open yet. I was here for answers. That was my real reason for staying. And yet, the longer I stayed, the closer I felt to Ronan. Then, one morning, voices pulled me from sleep. Angry, heated. I pushed back my blankets and stepped outside. A group had gathered in the open clearing, faces tense. In the center, Ronan and Dorian stood facing each other, tension rolling off them like a storm about to break.
You're guiding her wrong.
Dorian snapped.
Manipulating her.
Ronan's eyes darkened.
And what are you doing? Trying to take what's mine?
Mine? I frowned. The moment Ronan saw me, he stopped. Dorian followed his gaze, and just like that, the entire crowd turned. A wave of attention crashed over me, eyes studying, watching, waiting. I wasn't a person in that moment. I was a prize. A flicker of doubt ran through me. Am I really that important? Ronan broke the silence first, stepping closer.
I'm sorry, Lena.
He said, his voice softer now.
I didn't mean to wake you.
His eyes flicked to Dorian.
But I can't just stand here while he tries to twist things in his favor.
Dorian smirked.
So dramatic.
I crossed my arms. No, it's not true. Ronan's expression shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. A flicker of disbelief. He's never said anything against me? I hesitated. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I wasn't sure how to answer. Instead, I asked, why do I feel like you're always afraid of something? What are you hiding from me? His lips pressed into a thin line.
It's not like that.
Then what is it? Ronan glanced away for a second, then back to me.
When I feel like you truly accept me, then I'll tell you my secrets.
Yeah, secrets, the ones that involved my mother. I see, I said. The conversation ended there, unfinished and heavy, but the tension eased. The day moved on. We ate lunch together, surrounded by the pack. People laughed, talked, but my mind was elsewhere. Dorian barely looked at me, except for those few stolen glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He was waiting. That evening, Ronan disappeared for a while. I didn't ask where he went. Dorian, though, he was watching me again. This time he didn't hesitate. He approached, stopping just inches away.
It's time.
He said. I frowned. Time?
Come with me.
I followed. He led me out of the pack's land toward the town. The deeper we went, the more uneasy I felt. Where are we going? Dorian didn't look back.
Ronan's secret house.
I stopped. What?
Yes.
He kept walking.
You need to see this.
Minutes later, we stood in front of an old, abandoned house. From the outside, it looked forgotten. But when Dorian pushed the door open and stepped inside, everything changed. It wasn't empty. Not completely. Papers scattered across a wooden table, some old, some newer. My eyes landed on one, the words making my stomach drop. I will destroy the whole family of Mr. Linton. The room suddenly felt colder. I turned slowly, my gaze moving over the space. Then I saw it, a photo on the wall. A man's face scratched out with pen, the ink dug so deep that it tore the paper. But the name beside it wasn't faded. Mr. Linton, my father. I barely whispered, Ronan always wanted to destroy Mr. Linton? Dorian let out a breath. A smile, one of the saddest I'd ever seen, formed on his lips. I forced myself to keep looking. A file sat half open on the desk. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages. More words, more plans. I have to destroy Mr. Linton and his family. My stomach turned. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. And then a diary. Some pages missing, others barely legible, but one sentence stood out. Today I am feeling sad, but at least Mr. Linton is gone. He deserved it. I gripped the pages so tightly they crumpled. The truth was right in front of me, the answer I had been searching for. Ronan had destroyed my mother. He had been after my father too. I looked at Dorian, my voice barely above a whisper. What do I do now? He didn't hesitate.
You should never choose Ronan as your mate. That's all.
I exhaled sharply. Then who should I choose? Dorian's lips curved slightly.
Me, of course.
I stared at him. What?
You're smart enough to understand.
He said, and
I am the rightful alpha.
my thoughts spun, my emotions tangled together too fast to separate. But then one question burned through everything else. What about Cain? I stood up. My legs ached, my arms burned, but none of it mattered. My first real fight was over. I wasn't perfect. I knew that, but at least I had fought, I had tried, and now everyone was staring at me. The firelight flickered against their faces, illuminating the silent expressions of the pack members gathered around. Some looked proud, others skeptical. But the one I cared about the most, Ronan, was watching me with something else entirely in his eyes. Curiosity.
Why did you suddenly choose me?
Ronan's voice was steady, but I caught the faintest tremor of surprise beneath it. I took a breath, steadying myself. Cain manipulated me. He made me believe you had destroyed me, that you were the villain in my story. And then Dorian, he tried to convince me that you took my mother's life just to become alpha. But a few moments ago, in his jealousy, Dorian slipped up. He admitted the truth. I looked Ronan in the eye, letting the weight of my words settle between us. It was my father, Mr. Linton. He was the one who destroyed my mother, not you, not even Cain. And that's when I realized both Cain and Dorian never deserved to be alpha. They were both consumed by greed, by power. But you never were. A strange expression crossed Ronan's face. Relief mixed with something deeper, something raw. But then his gaze darkened.
The day my father was destroyed along with your mother,
He said slowly.
I swore I would take down the ones responsible. Mr. Linton had allies. His closest friend, his right-hand man, that was Cain's father. I wanted them all to pay for what they did to my family.
My mind spun. Wait, I said, stepping closer. Your father? What? My breath hitched. What was his name? Ronan's jaw tightened.
Casper.
The name sent a strange, hollow feeling through my chest. Before I could fully process it, Ronan spoke again.
Lena, tell me something.
He said, voice low.
Why did Mr. Linton destroy your mother? She was his wife. Why?
I swallowed hard. I've been asking myself the same thing. A voice from the crowd answered instead.
Lena,
One of the older pack members stepped forward.
Ronan's father loved your mother long before Mr. Linton ever laid eyes on her. They were meant to be together. Everyone knew it. But Mr. Linton was ruthless. He saw your mother, fell for her beauty, and decided she would be his, whether she wanted him or not.
A sickening realization crept up my spine. He kidnapped her? The man nodded grimly.
He was the most powerful man at the time. No one could stop him. He forced her into marriage, kept her locked away in his fortress. But Casper, he never gave up on her. He tried to save her. They planned to run away together.
But my father caught them. My voice was barely a whisper.
Yes, and by then you had already been born. Your father never loved your mother. To him she was nothing more than a way to carry his bloodline. But Casper, he truly loved her.
The weight of it all crashed down on me. My entire life I had grown up believing I was unwanted, abandoned. But my mother, she had fought. She had been stolen from the man she loved, and in the end she and Casper had been destroyed together. But there was more. There's something else, the pack member continued.
Before your mother was taken, she cursed Cain's bloodline. She said that if Cain ever married anyone other than you, he would be destroyed. The only way to break the curse was if you willingly accepted Cain as your mate. But she also said that if you chose Ronan instead, her spirit would finally be freed.
The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. My mother's last wish. She had wanted me to have the love she was denied. She had wanted me to choose Ronan. I turned to him, something shifting inside me. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around him. He tensed just for a second, then his arms locked around me, strong and certain. Ronan exhaled shakily against my hair.
Lena,
He murmured, voice thick with emotion.
I know you don't know me well yet, but I swear, I will never betray you, never abandon you. I would give you everything, even my soul if it meant you were safe.
Applause erupted around us. The pack cheered, voices blending into the night. For the first time in my life, I felt home. And then, Lena! I turned just as someone came rushing toward the fortress. Hannah. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes wide with something between frustration and relief. She stopped in front of me, panting. "Why the hell are you ignoring my calls?" she demanded. I was freaking out, and she paused, finally taking in Ronan. Her eyes raked over him and she smirked. "Okay, who is this handsome piece of—" I laughed, shaking my head. Hannah turned back to me, narrowing her eyes. "Wait, what are you doing here again? Why do you look so weirdly happy?" I met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I felt sure of my answer. "I just realized," I said, "we can have everything we need here. Safety, power, a life where no one can hurt us." I lifted my chin. "I think we should stay." Hannah blinked. "Are you serious?" I smiled. "Yeah, I am." A voice behind me spoke up.
So, what now?
I turned back to the pack. They were waiting, watching, expecting an answer. I glanced at Ronan. He looked at me, unreadable, but there was a question in his eyes, a silent one. I took a step forward. "I am your leader," I said, "and Ronan is your alpha." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one objected. If anything, there was acceptance. Ronan studied me for a moment.
Lena, are you sure?
His voice was quiet just for me.
We barely know each other. If you have doubts, we can take our time.
I tilted my head. "I might not know everything about you yet," I admitted. "Maybe I don't even know 1%, but that just means I get to spend the rest of my life figuring you out." A slow smile curved across Ronan's lips. The pack roared in approval. The celebration lasted deep into the night. Food, laughter, voices filling the fortress with something it had long been missing. Joy. And as I sat beside Ronan, watching the people around me, I remembered something. A dream. Ronan's voice whispering through the dark.
I am your true mate.
Maybe he had been right all along. Days passed, and little by little I learned the truth. Ronan wasn't just a good leader. He was a good man. He never sought power for himself. He never let greed drive his decisions. He listened, he protected, and he cared. My mother had seen it before I ever did, and in the end she had been right. I had chosen the right man, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be.